Hello, folks, and welcome to the Stories section. We offer stories on different topics. If you like our stories, make sure to hit like and subscribe buttons, and don't forget to press the bell icon to get the stories as soon as we post them. Help us grow so we can upload more stories. Now, without further ado, let's get right into today's story.
The Wheat and the Wire, a Country Betrayal.
The Sound of the Gavel.
The air in the Henderson County Courthouse was thick, smelling of old, polished wood and the metallic tang of fear. It was fear, not mine, but the visible, vibrating dread radiating off the two people sitting opposite me. Matthias Hudson, the king of this Tennessee valley, and Denise Miller, the woman who had once been my world. I sat ramrod straight, my custom-tailored suit, a dark, almost military-cut Italian wool, felt alien against the backdrop of my life as a small wheat farmer and dairyman. My attorney, Michael Greaves, leaned in, his silver hair immaculate, his eyes sharp and focused. The judge is about to rule on the injunction head. This is it, the pivot point. Michael murmured, his voice too low for the microphones to catch. I didn't blink. I simply watched Matthias. He was a man made of rough, dark-grained oak, big, red-necked, and utterly convinced of his own untouchable power. Beside him, Denise wore an expression of aggressive entitlement. She was beautiful, striking with her red hair, but the beauty was now overlaid with a veneer of cheap, materialistic arrogance she'd learned from Matthias. She believed I was a simpleton who had wasted her best years in muddy fields. She believed I had nothing left to offer but the farm. She was about to discover what happens when a man who fixes things with his hands also possesses the nuclear codes for high-level systematic destruction. The judge, Justice Ellen Douglas, cleared her throat, and the court fell into a painful silence. This was the opening salvo of our dual cases, Miller versus Miller, divorce, and Miller versus Hudson et al., criminal racketeering and conspiracy. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the sterile courtroom sounds fade. This moment, this sterile, brutal apex, wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the calculated, inevitable consequence of a lesson Matthias and Denise had taught me 9 months earlier. Never mistake a peaceful man for a passive one. I was taken back to the quiet life I had chosen, the peace they had shattered, and the cold, surgical precision with which I had been forced to reclaim my identity.
The Harvest of Simplicity.
My name is Edward Miller, but to the world outside a very small, secretive community in Washington, D.C., I am just Ed. My life was, until 9 months ago, a perfect, self-imposed exile. I was a farmer on a sprawling, fertile piece of land in rural Tennessee, miles from the nearest highway. I farmed a few small fields of premium wheat and maintained a small herd of Jersey cows. I loved the simplicity, the physical work, the honest smell of loam and silage, the quiet rhythm of the seasons. I lived this life because I had seen the absolute worst of the world, and I craved the beautiful banality of the everyday. For 15 years, I had been the head of a black ops task force within a highly classified government agency. We dealt with threats that never made the news: rogue weapons platforms, systematic corporate treason, and asset extraction from hostile sovereign nations. I had walked away from that life 5 years ago, officially retiring due to a back injury. The truth was, I retired because I met Denise. Denise was the reason I needed simplicity. She was vibrant, passionate, and, for a long time, the perfect counterweight to the darkness I had stored away. She loved the idea of the farm, the rustic charm, the fresh air. For 5 years, she was the beautiful red-haired center of my quiet universe. My wealth, amassed over 15 years of high-risk, high-reward covert work, was tucked away in blind trusts and global investments. It was a staggering fortune, secured and shielded by the same network of contacts I used to dismantle global threats. To Denise and the world, I was just a comfortable farmer with assets tied up in land and livestock. My primary buyer for both my wheat and the Jersey milk was Matthias Hudson. He owned Hudson Grains and Feed, the massive mill that processed every grain in the county, and Cumberland Creamery, the dairy that supplied most of East Tennessee. Matthias was loud, crude, and dripping with new money. He called me Boy Miller and slapped me on the back, patronizing my small yield. I tolerated him because he was efficient, and he paid on time. The cracks in my quiet life began subtly, like frost heave beneath concrete. Denise started complaining. "It's the same thing every day, Ed," she'd sigh, running a hand through her fiery hair while scrolling through glossy, expensive social media feeds. Wheat, milk, dust. When are we going to live? "This is living, Dee," I'd say, genuinely meaning it. Honest work, peace, and time together. "It's boring, Ed. It's safe. It's small." I attributed it to restless middle age. I was wrong. It was the sound of a new, predatory ambition taking root.
The scent of perfume and diesel.
The incident that shattered the illusion of my life was not dramatic. It was clinical. 3 months ago, I was driving the old Ford F-250 back from the feed store, a necessary interruption to my routine. Denise had left an hour earlier, claiming she was meeting her book club in Clarksville. I pulled into the gravel drive, and the scent hit me. A sharp, expensive perfume, entirely foreign to the farmhouse. It was a designer scent, something French and overtly sensual, mixed faintly with a heavy cologne I immediately identified as a classic, overpriced men's fragrance, Matthias Hudson's signature scent. My first thought was a simple break-in. My training took over, wiping away all emotion. My hand immediately went to the small caliber weapon I always carried, tucked into a concealed compartment in the truck's console. I swept the house, room by room, my movements silent, trained for lethality. I found nothing. No forced entry, no signs of disturbance. But on the floor of the utility closet, partially hidden beneath a laundry basket, I found a small golden cufflink. It was intricately engraved, clearly custom-made, bearing the small, distinctive crest of the Hudson family, the mill's logo. Denise's book club didn't meet near the Hudson estate, nor did they require the presence of a man who smelled like old money and cheap diesel. I didn't confront her. My former life, the one she knew nothing about, taught me that confrontation is a tool of the desperate. Intelligence is acquired in silence. That night, I opened the safe hidden beneath my workshop floor, not for cash, but for the one thing I had truly hidden from the world: my old encryption box, the quantum-hardened satellite communication kit, and a handful of encrypted drives containing the protocols and access keys to my old network. The farmer was gone. The analyst had taken his place. The target was no longer just Denise. The target was Matthias Hudson.
Setting the wire. The ghost in the wheat field.
The next few weeks were a blur of meticulous, covert activity that would have made my former agency proud. Denise noticed nothing. I was still the simple, quiet husband, doing my chores, talking about crop rotation. But after she went to bed, the quiet farmhouse became a high-tech surveillance hub. I deployed 3 specialized assets: a passive RF sensor hidden in the feed silo facing the road, a high-altitude drone camouflaged to look like a hawk that watched the perimeter of the Hudson estate, and my most critical asset, a remote access protocol I slipped into Matthias's financial software during a routine milk delivery drop-off. I told the clerk I needed to update my payment information, giving me 20 seconds near the office server rack. 20 seconds was 3 minutes in my old life. The evidence of the affair was immediate and undeniable. The drone captured several instances of Denise's sedan parked discreetly near the guest house of Matthias's sprawling, overly ornate countryside mansion. And the digital surveillance revealed texts, crude, arrogant, and laced with contempt for me and my simple life.
Denise texted, "He's complaining about the price of winter feed again. Honestly, Edward is so small time." Matthias replied, "Let the simp worry about his cows. We have bigger things to discuss, Denny. The New Deal is ready." The contempt was a dull pain, but the mention of a New Deal and the financial trail that followed was the thread I needed. I didn't just want a divorce. I wanted to understand the financial nexus that connected Matthias to Denise's sudden, corrosive ambition. What I found was horrifying. My probe into Matthias's Hudson Grains and Feed and Cumberland Creamery led me far past commodity fraud. He wasn't just shortchanging farmers and selling expired products. He was running the organized crime infrastructure for 4 counties. The mill wasn't just a mill. It was a transshipment hub. Wheat sacks often contained sealed metal canisters. My analysis of the heat signatures and manifest discrepancies indicated high-value, high-purity synthetic opioids, similar to what I'd tracked in my Black Ops life. They were using the agriculture supply chain to move drugs. It was contraband smuggling. My deep packet inspection of Matthias's encrypted messaging channels revealed weekly ledgers detailing protection payments from local businesses. More disturbingly, I found coded financial transfers linked to 2 known cold cases in the area involving missing persons, clear evidence of kidnapping and subsequent payoffs that Matthias facilitated or orchestrated. All this meant that he was involved in kidnapping, but also extortion. The New Deal texts led to the core of his enterprise, a systematic bribery and blackmail ring targeting the Tennessee Department of Agriculture and the state assembly. He had officials on his payroll, a senator, 2 DAs, and the head of the county agriculture board, all ensuring tax cuts, zoning approvals for illegal expansions, and immunity from health inspections. He was the cause of political corruption by bribery and blackmailing.
Matthias Hudson was not just a husband's rival. He was a financial terrorist and a crime lord using the sanctity of farm country as his personal fortress. The scope of the problem had just expanded from a domestic dispute to a full-scale covert operation. I needed more than a lawyer. I needed Michael Greaves.
The Councel.
I drove 300 miles north under the cloak of a thick, rolling mountain fog. The destination was a small, unassuming office building in a dense metropolitan district, the kind of place where lawyers handle trust funds and asset allocation, or where former Black Ops field directors conduct high-level strategy. Michael Greaves was waiting. Michael had been my legal counsel and my moral anchor in the agency. He had left shortly after I did, establishing a low-profile firm specializing in untouchable wealth protection and occasionally the quiet, surgical ruin of deserving adversaries. The handshake was firm, silent, and understanding. "Ed, I thought you were done with this kind of traffic," Michael said, gesturing to the secured tablet I placed on his desk, the one containing the initial data tranche on Matthias. I was. I wanted simple. But the simple man's wife chose the complex bastard, and the complex bastard turned out to be a high-value domestic threat. I recounted the affair, the cufflink, and the sickening discovery of the drug smuggling and corruption network. Michael, whose legal mind was a tactical weapon, looked over the data, the encrypted manifests, the heat signatures, the political payoff ledger, without reacting. "The divorce is a formality, Ed. Denise has no case. Tennessee is an equitable distribution state, but her proven adultery and cohabitation with a man actively engaged in criminal activity will gut any claim she has to marital assets, especially if we can prove she benefited from his criminal wealth." He paused, looking directly at me. "But we're not here for the divorce. We're here for the takedown." Correct. I want every single connection he has exposed. I want the mill seized, the dairy nationalized, and Matthias to spend the rest of his life in a hole. And I want the legal process to move with surgical, overwhelming force. This will require the full playbook, Ed. My firm will handle the civil fraud and the divorce, but we need your connections to deliver the criminal prosecution. You need to leverage the ties. NSA, FBI, even the oversight committees. No one moves this kind of contraband and blackmails a senator without leaving a trail that interests DC. The trail is clean. I've secured the core evidence on a sealed military-grade server. The key is in the delivery. I want the divorce served the same hour the federal indictments drop. I want his financial empire to implode the moment he served. Michael smiled, a cold, professional expression that used to terrify high-level defendants. Then we initiate Operation Simple Harvest. You keep digging the dirt. I'll start digging the grave.
The Lure of the Tainted Mansion.
The investigation required one more crucial piece of intelligence, the final, definitive proof of Matthias's untouchability and Denise's complicity. Matthias, like all narcissists, kept physical trophies. I needed to know where. The best way to understand a fortress is to walk inside its walls. I needed a reason to be there, and Matthias inadvertently provided it. He called me, the first time he had called me directly in 3 years, to discuss a sudden large order for my specialty winter wheat, demanding I come to his estate office the following day. "Don't bring your wife, Miller. Don't want her getting any ideas about upgrading her life. He chuckled, the arrogance thick and grating. I agreed calmly, my blood pressure steady, my plan already forming. This was the perfect cover. I drove the F-250 to his estate. The place was obscene, a massive faux colonial mansion built of gray stone, surrounded by perfectly manicured English gardens that looked violently out of place in the Tennessee heat. Behind it, the huge industrial sprawl of Hudson grains and feed dominated the horizon. Matthias's office was a shrine to his own ego, dark wood paneling, taxidermy animals, and shelves lined with expensive, unread books. He was behind his mahogany desk, signing papers. "Miller, glad you could drop your shovel for an hour," he sneered, not looking up. The deal was simple. He wanted to double the going rate for my entire crop, cash up front. It was a bribe, a clumsy attempt to keep me busy and distracted while he stole my wife. I signed the contract without reading it. The contract was irrelevant. The intelligence I gathered during the visit was priceless. As I left his office, I made my move. I triggered a small pre-planted RF jamming device in my watch, causing a localized Wi-Fi hiccup. The moment the power flickered slightly, I slipped away from the main hall, making a beeline for the south wing. My surveillance showed Matthias never used the security alarm in the west wing before 6 p.m. I needed less than 5 minutes. The west wing held the library. I found what I was looking for: a heavy antique safe hidden behind a sliding bookshelf. It wasn't the main vault, but an access point. I ran a quick acoustic signature scan of the tumbler. It would take an hour to crack silently, time I didn't have. But as I was preparing to retreat, a sound stopped me. A light musical laugh coming from the conservatory adjacent to the library. It was Denise. I moved silently to the glass-pane door, peering through the slight gap between the drapes. Denise was draped across a white velvet sofa, wearing a silk crimson slip dress I had never seen. Provocative, expensive, and completely out of character for the simple farmer's wife. Matthias was standing over her, holding a crystal glass of bourbon. The sight was less a jolt of pain and more a confirmation of the rot. But what happened next was the true ignition point. Matthias looked at her with possessive, cold admiration. "You look like you belong here, Denny, not in that dusty old barn with that small-time farmer." Denise smiled, a predatory, shallow expression. "I know, baby. That life, it was a good retirement plan, but I'm built for more than wheat and boring safety. I deserve a man who is the king of his own domain, not a servant to the earth." I didn't need to see or hear more to confirm the affair. But their words, the casual, aggressive contempt for the life I had built to protect her, detonated the last vestiges of my compassion. They had mistaken my quiet resolve for weakness, my retirement for apathy, and my love for idiocy. I stepped into the conservatory, the heavy glass door clicking shut behind me. "The man who fixed things is here," I said, my voice low and steady, not raised in anger, but cold with the finality of a death sentence.
The confrontation and the final betrayal.
The atmosphere in the conservatory froze. Matthias and Denise snapped their heads toward me. For a split second, I saw confusion, the naked panic in Denise's eyes, swiftly replaced by manufactured outrage. Matthias, however, immediately squared his shoulders, the arrogance returning tenfold. "Well, well, look who decided to leave his tractor," Matthias boomed, taking a step toward me. "What are you doing here, Miller? I told you to wait for the call." "I think I found my wife's book club," I replied, gesturing toward the red silk dress. "Nice attire, Denise. It really suits the new, exciting life you've been chasing." Denise jumped up, clutching her robe tightly around her, her voice shrill with defensive fury. "This is harassment, Edward. Get out of here. You have no right." "No right," I echoed, tilting my head slightly. "For 5 years, I gave you peace, security, and an honest name. And you traded it for this? A racketeer who profits off addicts and blackmails civil servants?" Matthias laughed, a loud, disdainful bark. "Smells like jealousy, Denny. You should leave, Miller. You're punching well above your weight class. Your wife is bored, Ed. Look at this house. Look at the life she has here. What do you give her? Mud, milk, and early bedtimes?" Denise stepped toward me, her face contorted, fueled by Matthias's defense. "He's right, Edward. I hate that life. I hate the boring honesty, the simplicity. I want flashy. I want meaning. I want excitement. You were fine as a partner, but as a man, you're just mediocre. Matthias can give me the world, a meaningful life, a life of consequence." Her words, mediocre, boring honesty, landed not as wounds, but as information. She supported the crime lord over the man who had kept her safe.
"A life of consequence, Denise," I repeated, the words sounding like broken glass. "You don't understand consequence. You only understand cost." I straightened my jacket, the last shred of my old marriage dissolving into bitter clarity. The love was gone. The mission was absolute. "This is your last day of freedom, Matthias," I stated, my eyes locked on his, the training taking over. "And this is your last day as my wife, Denise. You've both made a catastrophic miscalculation. You thought I was small. You are about to discover the difference between a small farmer and a former intelligence operative who decided you needed to be liquidated from the system." I turned, walked out of the mansion, and drove home. I didn't look back. The moment I stepped over the threshold of my farmhouse, I called Michael Greaves. "It's time, Michael. File the divorce and the federal lawsuit. Simultaneous drop. The grounds are malicious intent, conspiracy to defraud, and documented adultery. The target is everything Matthias owns." "Understood, Ed. Simple Harvest goes live at dawn."
The Ghost in the Machine.
The next 6 months were a complex ballet of farming and financial warfare. By day, I was Edward Miller, milking my cows and harvesting my wheat, watching Matthias's trucks pull in and out. By night, I was the operator, feeding Michael Greaves the intricate, devastating evidence I was extracting. The crucial evidence was hidden in Matthias's custom encryption software, which he used for his organized crime network. The firm he had hired to develop it was sloppy. I had found a persistent backdoor vulnerability, a relic of a previous life's exploit, that only 2 people in the world knew how to leverage. I used my secret resources to establish a deep connection. My wealth wasn't just money. It bought leverage and access to services no ordinary person could acquire. I used my blind trusts to fund a specialized intelligence cell,
a small team of former agency coders who worked remotely, never knowing my true identity.
I mapped the ingress and egress points for the synthetic opioids, from the docks in the Gulf to the Hudson Grains and Feed Mill, disguised as agricultural feed imports. The mill used a complex series of conveyor belts and gravity separators to route the contraband into sealed metal cylinders, disguised as fertilizer canisters. Matthias kept his most sensitive documents in a physical safe in the mill, but his daily blackmail data, the private texts, the leaked photos, the recorded phone calls used to control local officials, was stored on a redundant network server within the Cumberland Creamery office. The irony was perfect. The dirtiest secrets stored next to the freshest milk. The crown jewel was the detailed, handwritten ledger of payoffs to Senator Thomas Robinson. Matthias kept a separate, encrypted digital copy. This ledger was the final, undeniable proof of treason and systemic corruption, linking a federal official directly to an international drug smuggling operation.
Michael and I held daily, encrypted conference calls. I have the senator's ledger, Michael. It's clean, time-stamped, and linked to the Swiss accounts Matthias uses for laundering the drug money. It proves he controls 2 county DAs and the entire Agriculture Board. Perfect, Ed. That's not a lawsuit. That's a RICO charge. The FBI is going to treat this like a hostile takeover. We just need the final act of documentation, Denise's direct involvement, no matter how small, to ensure her divorce claims are nullified on grounds of financial conspiracy. Denise was the secondary problem, the personal setback I needed to resolve cleanly. The final betrayal at the mansion had given me the clarity to treat her as an asset loss, not a human being. The answer came from the surveillance I had running on her new life in the mansion. She wasn't an active participant in the crime, but she was Matthias's personal bookkeeper for his legal assets, and she was already benefiting from the criminal money. She was taking control of the Cumberland Creamery's distribution accounts.
The milk and the money laundering.
Denise, blinded by the perceived glamour and power of Matthias, had been handed the keys to the Cumberland Creamery's daily ledger. Matthias viewed it as a simple, safe task for his trophy wife, a way to occupy her and show off her new status. My intelligence cell identified a pattern. Denise was using the creamery's distribution network to pay for her extravagant purchases. She would issue a payment for an entirely legitimate but slightly overpriced delivery of supplies to the creamery, and the vendor, who was in on the scheme, would kick back 30% of the overcharge to a high-end designer boutique in Nashville. Essentially, the clean milk money was funding her new wardrobe and jewelry, while disguising money originating from the crime network. This was it. Not murder, not drug running, but simple, provable mail fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering. I forwarded the evidence to Michael.
I have her, Michael. She's complicit in financial fraud related to the creamery's legitimate revenue stream. It's small, but it's clean, undeniable evidence that she was a willing beneficiary and co-conspirator in a systematic financial deception while married to me. That's the legal nuclear deterrent, Ed, Michael confirmed. It destroys any claim she has to equitable distribution. We can prove she actively defrauded a legitimate business, the creamery, which is also the co-defendant in the RICO suit. Her credibility is zero. Her motive is malice. She gets nothing. The final piece of the legal puzzle was in place. We had the senator's ledger, the smuggling route data, and the extortion records. We were going to file a RICO case against Matthias.
The divorce case against Denise would include adultery, malicious intent, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud against a marital asset, my farm's stability, since she was actively stealing from its main purchaser, and her own direct involvement in the creamery's fraudulent accounting. Michael set the date, the divorce hearing and the preliminary hearing for the federal lawsuit against Matthias Hudson and his co-conspirators, including Senator Robinson, to be named later, were scheduled for the same morning in the same courthouse.
The Courtroom Fire.
The date arrived 9 months after the discovery of the cufflink. I was watching Matthias and Denise across the aisle. The cases were taken concurrently by Justice Douglas, who fortunately was known for her unyielding integrity and no-nonsense approach to both domestic disputes and corporate crime. Matthias's lawyer, a slick, expensive man named Mr. Denton, started first, focusing entirely on the divorce, confident that the criminal allegations were merely a scare tactic. Your Honor, we maintain that Mr. Miller is incapable of providing the lifestyle Mrs. Miller deserves. His earnings are meager, his life is dull, and the marital estate is minimal, largely tied up in a depreciating farm. Mrs. Miller, now cohabitating with a successful businessman, Mr. Hudson, seeks only fair compensation for years of emotional neglect. Mr. Denton pointed to Matthias. My client, Mr. Hudson, is a pillar of this community, running the Hudson Grains and Feed and Cumberland Creamery, a multi-million-dollar operation. The notion of a criminal enterprise is outlandish. Denise leaned forward, staring at me with triumphant contempt, as if the lawyer's words were proof of my defeat. Michael Greaves stood up slowly. He wasn't loud or aggressive. He was surgically precise. Your Honor, Michael began, Mr. Denton's entire argument rests on two flawed premises: the financial insignificance of my client and the presumed legitimacy of Mr. Hudson. Let us address the first. Michael produced a single certified document. We are submitting Exhibit 1, a certified, audited statement of my client's total net worth, calculated by a forensic accounting team. You will note, Your Honor, that this valuation, which is entirely separate from the farm, exceeds $450 million.
A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Matthias actually choked, his face turning from red to a mottled purple. Denise stared at the document as if it were a physical explosion. The $450 million figure, the reality of the Black Ops fortune, had finally surfaced. The small-time farmer, Your Honor, is financially solvent, Michael continued dryly. He chose to live simply. He then addressed Denise directly. Mrs. Miller, in your filing, you claim financial neglect. Were you aware that your husband, Edward Miller, was a highly decorated former head of a Black Ops task force for a sensitive U.S. government agency, a role that required absolute secrecy and enabled his current financial status? Denise stammered, shaking her head wildly. No, he told me he had a small trust fund.
Precisely, Michael confirmed, looking back at the judge. The respondent maintained his identity for her protection and his security. She betrayed that trust for the illusory promise of the co-respondent's criminal wealth. Michael then delivered the final, devastating blow to the divorce case, backed by the creamery's false ledgers. In Exhibit 2, we present irrefutable evidence that Mrs. Miller, while cohabitating with Mr. Hudson, was actively engaged in a conspiracy to defraud the Cumberland Creamery's ledger, a co-defendant in the subsequent federal case, to illegally fund her personal, high-end purchases. Her adultery is documented. Her intent to acquire criminal wealth is documented. Her conspiracy to commit financial fraud is documented. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. Mrs. Miller has not only committed egregious misconduct, but has actively engaged in financial crimes. We move for a swift divorce on grounds of documented adultery and conspiracy, and demand the denial of any spousal support or equitable distribution, on the basis that Mrs. Miller's actions were an attack on the integrity of the marital estate.
Justice Douglas, after reviewing the documents, pounded her gavel. Divorce is granted on the grounds of adultery and egregious misconduct. All claims by Mrs. Miller for spousal support or asset division are denied. The court finds the petitioner's actions were founded on malice and provable criminal intent. Mr. Miller is awarded the marital home and all associated assets. Denise screamed a muffled, defeated sound, scrambling to grab Matthias's arm. But Matthias had bigger problems.
The Fall of the Kingpin.
As the divorce was finalized, Michael pivoted, seamlessly moving to the preliminary hearing of the federal lawsuit. Your Honor, we now turn to Miller v. Hudson et al. We are submitting evidence of systematic racketeering, financial treason, and conspiracy to traffic controlled substances, placing Mr. Hudson's enterprises, Hudson Grains and Feed and Cumberland Creamery, under immediate federal injunction and asset seizure. Michael presented the Senator's ledger. Exhibit 3 is the encrypted ledger detailing payoffs to sitting Senator Thomas Robinson and several other state officials. This proves a conspiracy to violate federal law. Exhibit 4 is the logistics data, cross-referenced with my client's intelligence network, detailing the use of the Hudson Grains and Feed Mill as a transshipment point for cartel-grade synthetic opioids.
The air turned electric. Suddenly, the double doors of the courtroom burst open, and two teams of sharp-suited FBI agents and U.S. Marshals swept in, their faces grim. Matthias, realizing the full scope of the trap, pushed back from the table, yelling, "Denton, stop this! This is slander! This is a simple divorce!" Mr. Denton, sweating profusely, muttered, "It's too late, Mr. Hudson. This isn't a divorce. It's a RICO indictment." Justice Douglas slammed her gavel down 3 times. Order. Based on the irrefutable evidence of racketeering, bribery, and trafficking presented to this court and simultaneously delivered to the FBI, this court grants the immediate injunction, asset freeze, and seizure of all Hudson Grains and Feed and Cumberland Creamery properties. Mr. Hudson, you are now in federal custody. The FBI agents moved in. One grabbed Matthias's arm, snapping the cuffs on. Matthias screamed, thrashing against the agent's grip. "You won't get away with this, Miller. I'll crush you. I'll ruin that farm." I simply looked at him, the cold resolution unwavering. "You thought you were dealing with a farmer, Matthias. You should have checked the harvest date." Matthias Hudson was dragged out of the courtroom, his empire collapsing in a single ruinous morning.
The final crop.
The silence that followed Matthias's spectacular downfall was profound. The crowd was stunned. Denise stood alone, sobbing, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. She had chosen a criminal for his money, only to lose the quiet, honest billionaire she had discarded. She had nothing. Michael Greaves packed his briefcase, giving me a rare, genuine smile. "Simple harvest. Total yield, Ed." I nodded, the emotional tension of the past 9 months finally easing. The mission was complete. The system was cleaned, the threat neutralized, and my life was free of the corrosive rot of deception. I walked out of the courthouse, not as a farmer, nor as a spy, but simply as Edward Miller, a man who had fixed the broken thing in his life. The divorce was done, the criminal was jailed, and the peace I had craved for 5 years was finally, truly mine. The fall of Matthias Hudson and his empire, though centered in a small Tennessee town, sent shockwaves through the state's political and agricultural sectors. The mill and the creamery were taken into federal receivership, exposing the widespread corruption within the Department of Agriculture. Senator Robinson and dozens of local officials were indicted, based on the strength of the ledger I provided. The true magnitude of the smuggling ring was revealed, leading to a massive national investigation. My name never appeared in connection with the federal case, only the divorce. The world knew Edward Miller won his divorce against a cheating wife and exposed a corrupt businessman. Only a handful of people knew the truth, that a quiet farmer had just conducted the most successful domestic black ops takedown in decades.
Denise lost everything. She had no legal grounds to claim any of my enormous wealth, and her association with Matthias, coupled with the evidence of her own financial fraud, made her reputation toxic. She was forced to leave the county, ostracized by the very social circles she had sought to impress. She quickly ran out of the money she had stolen and ended up working multiple low-paying jobs in a city far from Tennessee. She lost the loving, honest security of her former life and the dream of the flashy, exciting life. She was left only with the cold, hard consequence of her choices.
Matthias, convicted of multiple counts of racketeering, conspiracy, and financial fraud, was sentenced to multiple life terms in a federal penitentiary. His once sprawling empire was completely liquidated, his assets seized, and his name became synonymous with corporate greed and regional corruption. He died in prison 5 years later, stripped of his power, his wealth, and his dignity.
Michael Greaves' reputation as a high-stakes, ruthless attorney was solidified. He continued to manage my assets and provided consultation for the federal agencies cleaning up the mess Matthias left behind. The victory secured his firm's legacy, and he remained my trusted friend and confidant, often visiting the farm for quiet weekends, trading legal strategies for the calming sight of honest wheat fields. I returned to my farm, which now represented genuine peace and honest work, unmarred by betrayal. I continued my quiet life, finding a renewed appreciation for the smell of the wheat and the rhythm of the Jersey cows. My vast wealth remained a secret, now leveraged for quiet, philanthropic projects aimed at cleaning up the agricultural systems exposed by Matthias's crimes. 2 years later, while consulting on a clean water initiative in rural Kentucky, I met Sarah. She was an environmental scientist, kind, brilliant, and deeply passionate about simplicity and the land. There were no secrets, no pretense, and no material ambitions. Our bond was immediate and profound, built on shared integrity. We married quietly on my farm, celebrating with friends and family, including Michael Greaves. I finally achieved the genuine, loving, peaceful life I had retired to find.